Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first this week for our two games is 2005's Shadow of the Colossus, the giant-slaying adventure with what some argue is the best soundtrack of all time.
After that, it's arguably one of the most influential and well-known JRPGs ever made that led its franchise into a whole new dimension of popularity, 1997's Final Fantasy VII.
So yes, a few possible themes this week. Definitely very influential PlayStation classics. PlayStation exclusive games, whether it's on the first PlayStation or PlayStation 2. We're also talking about large enemies, whether they're necessary for the game, like the Colossi, or the weapons in Final Fantasy VII. Also, heartbreaking character deaths. You know the games, you know which ones we refer to.
Yep.
Joe, we're coming off our April Fool's Day episode. Thank you so much for indulging us. What were some of your thoughts on that one, now a week removed?
I had a good time doing that episode. I liked being able to talk about Initial D. I don't think that I'd ever be like, well, it's time to start a second show to do only anime anytime soon, because I don't think it lended itself as well to the format as video games do, but it was a good time.
It was definitely fun. I want to thank Matt again for joining us, because it was a whole lot of fun to have him join and give his perspective. Though a 3-person sound chat in the flow seemed fun and good and it worked, I think it just made for an extra long podcast. So not only that, just a very, very tedious edit on the video front with 3 video layers and 3 audio layers, and stitching that all just right was a bear. So I don't think we're doing that anytime soon.
Yeah, probably not.
And we may have to raise the question if that's even a possibility next year. So I want to say, yeah, it was great to have Matt on. He provided great insight, but that was a little rough. I feel like for some people, like the length of a podcast, like one of our games is like a good length for them. And maybe some of them just tune in only to hear us talk about that game. But some also like the 2-game length. 3 was a lot in this day and age of podcasting.
Yeah, and while it wasn't significantly longer than a usual episode, it was still like, usually we tend to live at about an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes long. And there's usually a good split down the middle, and this was about a 2-hour episode, and I don't know, it was like, obviously the sections felt like they were a little bit shorter than usual, but even at the same time, I don't think they actually were, so,
yeah.
Like you said, it's not something we'll probably do again, but it was a nice little change of pace and a nice little experiment. Now we know.
Hopefully people did get to enjoy that, though. Let's talk about some composer follow-up news, the headlines from the composers that we've talked about throughout the course of this show. What are they working on now? Life goes on. But also we talk about just game news about soundtracks in general, like the BAFTAs happened in this remote Corona world here. It was an online show for the BAFTAs over in England. Disco Elysium won Best Music, while Ape Out won Best Audio. Not necessarily what had been winning most of the other awards. It was usually Death Stranding picking up music awards, but good on Disco Elysium. That game that could really, starting at the Game Awards, I think taking home some solid awards. So well done to them.
I haven't heard any of Disco Elysium's soundtrack, but I still have to play it. It sounds really up my alley, and also like it's extremely funny. So eventually I'll get to it. Shantae and the Seven Sirens is coming to current platforms on May 28th, 2020. It's actually already out on Apple Arcade, if you care about Apple Arcade, which some of you might. So if you do, you can go play it right now. But on everything else, it's releasing 28th of May for $29.99. Again, having that soundtrack by Jake Kaufman. the Shantae games are great, their soundtracks are great, and I'm very much looking forward to Seven Sirens.
We may have to reconsider what we do for our episode that week, because let's just say some release plans got shuffled around.
Yeah.
So Shantae may be involved once again. The original Nier game, or at least what America knew as Nier, is being remastered as Nier Replicant. And we mention this because Keiichi Okabe is once again involved with the project. So good to see that game getting a little love, especially after the success of Automata.
It's unfortunate that it is the brother version and not the dad version. If you don't know, Nier, the original Nier, was split into two parts, being Gestalt and Replicant. We only got Gestalt, which was the Xbox version in Japan, where you play as a dad protecting his daughter, and in Replicant, you play as a brother protecting his sister. The reason that Gestalt even exists is because the publisher told them, like, yeah, brother protecting sister isn't going to sell well in the West. You got to do father protecting daughter. So, but they didn't want to make that version, so we got the brother version, and whatever. Maybe it'll play good. Who knows?
I knew that there was Gestalt and Replicant, but I didn't know the differences. That's really interesting, huh?
On a specific composer note that we will also talk about later this episode, Nobuo Uematsu is adding music to the game Dandy Dungeon 2. A little bit inside baseball here. I wanted to bring Dandy Dungeon to the show, but nobody has released the soundtrack anywhere. So I can't listen to the music to put together a list or anything like that. But it's a very good game. You can buy it on Switch, and it's also on mobile. And the Dandy Dungeon 2 is actually just an update to Dandy Dungeon that just staples a sequel on. So check that out.
Very interesting. And related to Nobuo Uematsu, the Final Fantasy VII Remake Orchestra Tour has been announced, and it's related because, we're coming up here this week for the remake being launched worldwide.
We'll see if this orchestra tour actually happens.
It's a good question, come to think of it. So yeah, lots of headlines to catch up on. We'll start with our first game this week, though, and we're talking about Shadow of the Colossus. Now, we're going to have a lot to talk about with Final Fantasy VII later in the episode. So I didn't want to go too deep here on Shadow of the Colossus. Also, because not as much on Shadow of the Colossus. You'd think for such an influential game, there'd be tons and tons of information, and not so. Not readily available. So we'll have a quicker segment here before we get into the real meat with Final Fantasy VII. But Shadow of the Colossus is a very important game to talk about when it comes to video game soundtracks, because most people like to peg it as one of the best video game soundtracks of all time. I'm up there in it's in the high percentage of those, but I still think, when most of the game is about the environmental silence and the noise, it's a little hit or miss there. When you talk about a game like Chrono Trigger, for example, music everywhere, music helps define the entire experience of that game. So if we're trying to compare the two. But we can't talk about Shadow of the Colossus without talking about Fumito Ueda. And Fumito Ueda is the auteur behind Team Ico, which was a team during the PlayStation 2 era that was developing games for the platform, starting with Ico from 2001, the game infamous for being a long quest where you are guiding a girl who has her own computer AI, and you're just kind of leading them around the world, helping them guide on this journey. That's one long quest like that. Then you had 2005's Shadow of the Colossus, which we'll get to, and then 2016's The Last Guardian. Oh, remember the Last Guardian memes of how it was delayed for so long and all of that. The Last Guardian ultimately ended up being developed by Ueda's new company, Gen Design. But it's kind of the trilogy of the Team Ico vision there. So Shadow of the Colossus is this game that's kind of sitting in the middle of those three. And it was released on October 18th, 2005 in North America. That's right, North America got the game first. Very interesting. This is a PlayStation 2 game. Japan saw the game on October 27th, 2005 as Wanda to Kyozo. That roughly translates out to Wander and the Colossus. Australia and Europe got the game on February 16th and 17th, 2006, respectively. From there, Shadow of the Colossus has gone through a couple of HD remaster remake revisions. So the first of these was in September 2011, where it was more of an HD remaster as part of the Eco and Shadow of the Colossus collection. This is a PlayStation 3 game made by Blue Point Games, one of the best remaster companies in the business. This gave the game HD graphics, a few gameplay tweaks, trophies, and 3D support.
Oh, man.
Because that was the time where 3D things were... I'm looking at a PlayStation 3D monitor right now. Right here below my webcam. That's a PlayStation 3D monitor. I could probably fetch out the PlayStation 3D glasses if necessary. So yes, this was a game that had that support. Around the same time as like Uncharted 3 also had that 3D support. But then more recently, it was a remake of Shadow of the Colossus from the ground up, also by Blue Point Games. This was released in February 2018 for PlayStation 4. If you are a PlayStation 4 owner and you have PlayStation Plus, you may remember that very recently, possibly even like last month, Shadow of the Colossus was a free game as part of PlayStation Plus, along with Sonic Forces, which is just the oddest pairing. So if you have PS Plus, you very well may have access to the most recent version of Shadow of the Colossus. The original PS2 game was developed by Sony Computer Entertainment Japan Studio and Team Ico, published as a first-party game by Sony Computer Entertainment. This is a third-person action-adventure game where a character uses a horse, a sword, and a bow and arrow to travel across a big open world in order to climb and slay 16 giant creatures. That's it. And it sounds simple, right? Well, the narrative is even simpler. I promise you that. It's about a young man named Wander, or in Japan, it's Wanda, who has entered the Forbidden Lands with his horse Agro in an attempt to save the life of a girl named Mono. There is a mysterious entity in these lands named Dorman who offers Wander this power, saying that he can save the girl's life, but in exchange, Wander has to kill the 16 colossi that roam the lands. That's it. That's the story. Can Wander defeat each colossus? Can or will Mono actually come back to life? Joe, this is where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Shadow of the Colossus?
I have never played it, but I have watched it quite a few times. I think the Best Friends did it at some point. They might not have. I might be making that up. But I know I watched the Game Grumps play it back when I was watching them. And for the remaster specifically, when that came out, my roommate, who is a big fan of Shadow of the Colossus, bought it. And I just sort of sat in the living room working on schoolwork while he played the entire game in one go, which was a very fun experience to watch, honestly.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
And that's pretty much all the experience I have with Shadow of the Colossus. I think I tried to play it at one point, and I don't remember why I didn't continue, but I didn't continue. Maybe one day I'll try again. I don't know.
Same. I tried to play it at one point, the original PS2 version. Got frustrated, got through 2 colossi at least, but yeah, got frustrated for whatever reason, maybe the controls or whatever. So it's a game that I love that this industry has, honestly. It's a great shining example of games as art, games as, telling a narrative simply and well, and, telling a story and presenting gameplay through mechanics. Climbing a colossus is difficult, because of course it is. It's a difficult thing to do.
You're climbing something that is moving.
It's alive, it's made of like rocks and moss and all these like inorganic edges and parts. And I've been on an Assassin's Creed kick lately, showing my girlfriend that series, and the whole idea of like showing her like for climbing these buildings as Ezio, and you have to kind of like wrap around the building, kind of find where the ledges are. And so when I'm trying to explain this game to her, it's like, okay, imagine climbing a building in Assassin's Creed looking for all those edges, but imagine that it's moving and you only have limited grip strength. And it's like, that's kind of it in a way. A lot of people compare it to like a puzzle game, because the idea is like there are these sigils on the colossi that you have to discover, like locate with your sword that kind of points a little beam of light at them, find them, discover how to get to them, and then stab those sigils. So it's almost like a puzzle game in a way, more than an action adventure game. But yeah, it's this experience. And once I did not want to continue playing, got frustrated by it, I watched it, and so I know how the game goes and whatnot, but I have not played any of the remasters. Obviously now I own the PS4 version, but like researching it and talking about it when there's a little more downtime as far as games, because 2020 is intense with games right now. Maybe it's something I go back to and try again, see how they've touched it up. Because Blue Point is, they're among the best in the business with taking a game, an already established game from scratch and just making it shine.
Please be making Silent Hill. This is all I ask.
Ooh, I wonder what they're working on. All those rumors, it's crazy. Please just don't be Demon Souls. I love Souls people, Souls fans, but like, I feel like they can do better than Demon Souls.
Silent Hill 2 and 3 cannot be played right now in a good manner. Please be remastering those.
Yeah, unless you're going back to PS2, right? That'd be really interesting. So, Shadow of the Colossus originally began development as Nico, which is a portmanteau of Ni and Eco, like second Eco. This is the game that came after Eco, and I guess in a way, some people consider it like a prequel to Eco. There are a couple items that like tie into Eco. I just have never thought of it that way. I just thought, the next logical development progression for a team. A team that started development with 35 people in 2002. And Ueda is known as being a perfectionist. So he only felt that like one or two out of like 500 artists who applied to work on the game, like only those couple people would like even meet his criteria. And then even like demand thorough changes in design throughout development until it matched his vision. So a tough auteur to work for. But the game is really all about the Colossi. You have, the narrative of the characters of Wander with Agro and trying to help Mono. But the Colossi really shine. And it's interesting that they all have names when you look up these giant figures online. But these names are not official, and they're never referred to by name in the game. But the Colossi, just imagine these giant beings that they're a fusion of organic and inorganic elements, rock, earth, fur, some architectural structures. Some could be weathered or fractured. Ueda was inspired by The Legend of Zelda, and he thought of these Colossi as inverted Zelda dungeons.
So there you go, puzzles.
Yeah, exactly. Puzzles, it's a good way of thinking about it. These Colossi are numbered and named as such. The first is Valus, 2, Quadratus, 3, Gaius, 4, Phaedra, 5, Avion, 6, Barba, 7, Hydrus, 8, Kuromori, 9, Basaran, 10, Dirge, 11, Celotia, 12, Pelagia, 13, Phalanx, 14, Zenobia, 15, Argus, and 16, Malice. I feel like either the first one, or sometimes the second one, or the last one is what a lot of people generally think of when they think of Shadow of the Colossus. Malice is the really, really tall one with the sword that comes crashing down onto the earth, which is just devastating. And then you climb up the sword. It's a whole thing. So Agro being the horse, can be used sometimes for battle, whether you have to leap off of him or use him for traversal across a wide range of land. He can be used apparently for Colossi 2, 4, 9, 10, and 13. There are animals or some fruit throughout the world, so white-tailed lizards can be killed and then eaten to increase Wander's stamina, whereas fruit can be found and eaten to increase health. And Agro as a horse does not always fully obey, and that was something that the team was proud of during development, because animals don't always fully obey.
Especially when running next to a Colossus.
Yeah, some scary being. And this is where The Last Guardian also says hi, because Trico in that game doesn't always fully obey, because he's a giant animal. Shadow of the Colossus was reviewed very highly at the time with a Metacritic score of 91. A lot of people look back on this game, and especially at the time for a PlayStation 2 game, it's been reflected on as, quote, a fiction of unquestionable thematic richness, of riveting emotional power, whose fundamental artistic qualities are completely fused with its interactivity. So, as a game concept, as the execution of the simplicity yet complexity of a game, the statements that a game can make, it's among the best that the industry has to offer. But the original does suffer from some problems. There are some frame rate issues, especially when a lot is happening with Colossi crashing into the earth and things like this. There's some camera control issues where some people are like, it's an enemy that you have to fight alongside the Colossus. Controls are also a problem. And then the complaint that we've talked about at the time where some people are like, the game is 6 to 8 hours long, and that's too short for a game. And it's like, what are you talking about?
I've seen, to make that more like recent, I've been seeing that complaint about Resident Evil 3. Just 8 hours is fine. That's a good length for a game.
Yeah, so it's a little frustrating in that regard. But the remasters definitely touched up and improved a lot of those things. So it's a bona fide classic. Shadow of the Colossus is one of the seminal PlayStation 2 titles, one of the seminal games of all time. Like it's among the best of what the industry has to offer, I think. It's just not for everybody, as I think we have kind of vouched for. The game did sell well, though, certainly much better than Eco did, with 140,000 copies sold in its first week at retail in Japan, making it the highest selling game that week. It was Game of the Year alongside other awards at the GDC Awards that year, and the soundtrack won Soundtrack of the Year from Electronic Gaming Monthly. Shadow of the Colossus is a highly influential game, and we'll talk about Final Fantasy VII being very influential as well, but for Shadow of the Colossus, the game concept that it is was cited as an influence on various video games, including God of War 2, God of War 3, Titan Souls, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Death's Gambit, and Pray for the Gods. Like other video games, there is a Hollywood film concept that has been in development hell since 2009.
That recent. Man, figured it'd have been in there longer.
So, yeah, it's been in there a while, but I think the most interesting thing I found out about the game was through the Wikipedia article. So if you'll indulge me where I say, quote, the game plays a significant role in the 2007 Mike Binder, and here I'll do a sidebar, also the Sony-owned Columbia Pictures studio, the 2007 Mike Binder film Reign Over Me, as one of the ways that Adam Sandler's character copes with his primary struggle, with aspects of the game mirroring the tragedy that befell Sandler's character. Shadow of the Colossus's falling giants mirrored the crashing towers of the September 11th attacks, in which his wife and children died, and the game's lead character trying to resurrect his deceased love are two of the main themes which strike a similarity.
I think I've seen clips of this movie.
Yeah, so an Adam Sandler drama pick was heavily inspired by Shadow of the Colossus, to the point that the director was like trying to show Sandler this game, and even like there's a scene, I guess, where he ad-libs something about how that game controls. but also to the point where Adam Sandler and Don Cheadle, who were the two leads, they became apparently experts at the game before filming began, before they arrived on set. I had no idea that it had like this kind of tie, but it's actually cited as like a good example of like understanding the theming of a game story well and like implementing it and adapting it to Hollywood just in a different way.
Yeah, that's neat. You don't see that very often.
You certainly don't. The composer for Shadow of the Colossus is Kow Otani. And Kow Otani is a man who you see his name spelled plenty of different ways on the internet. I feel like ultimately I arrived at figuring out that when Sony put out an interview with him for the Shadow of the Colossus remake, the 2018 game, I had an interview with him and they titled his name as a certain way in the video, and also his Twitter account at Kow Otani. You see his name, stylized with K-O with the line on top, and then O with the line on top, T-A-N-I, or K-O-W-O-H-T-A-N-I. So like a bunch of different ways to spell his name, but K-O-W-O-T-A-N-I seems to be the official way. And then also in the credits for Shadow of the Colossus, this is also how his name is spelled. So we're going to go with that. But you see it several different ways. Same person. I wish I could have found more information about this man because he seems really interesting. He's been around for a while. He's born May 1st, 1957 in Tokyo, Japan. After he graduated from university, he became a founding member of Yuji Saito's production company, this music production company called Imagine. And this company is going to feature musicians such as Kohei Tanaka, who we talked about on the Gravity Rush episode, also Shiro Hamaguchi, Hayato Matsuo, and Shinji Miyazaki. I found a website that had a list of his favorites, which these are always fun. I feel like it kind of personalizes the musician a little bit more. So his favorite artist, Led Zeppelin. Favorite car, the Rover Mini. Some of his childhood aspirations to either be Tarzan or a ninja. His favorite color is red. His favorite food, sake.
That's unhealthy.
His favorite place, the sea. And his favorite sport, Major League Soccer. Would not have guessed that one. So, what has Kow Otani worked on? Shadow of the Colossus is his big game project. But some of his other games, there's one called Philosoma, Sky Odyssey, Heavy Metal Thunder, as one of the many for Sengoku Basara 3, and he contributed some songs to Diablo 3. But it's like part of this special music release for the game. So, but not the actual game itself. Some anime he's worked on include Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, Outlaw Star, Zatch Bell, and Eyeshield 21. And he's worked on some films, including these 3 Gamera films in the 1990s, which are apparently called the Heisei Trilogy. And this one film called Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack.
Yeah.
So, a couple big, giant creature films. Oh, interesting. Also, like the giant creatures found in Shadow of the Colossus.
Makes you think.
It's a game that has an extensive orchestral soundtrack. However, music is only heard during cutscenes and the Colossus encounters. As I referred to earlier, when Wander is navigating the world, or he's kind of going around this home base area, the music is silent, and it's all about the environmental noises, the noises of aggro, and just the loneliness that is here in the Forbidden Lands. But it's only when big story elements or these giant encounters that happen that these great pieces you really pop up. Otani played piano, which is like that's his instrument specialty, as well as the Irish bouzouki. And we've talked about the bouzouki before, and it makes a prominent appearance on this soundtrack. what are the songs, you may be wondering, that I picked for the Critical 5 here for Shadow of the Colossus? Let's start with the first one, The Opened Way. Shadow of the Colossus is a soundtrack that has Japanese titles along with it. So I always find these interesting, what was the original title and how did it translate over? So The Opened Way, also known as Hirakareru Michi. The Opened Way plays during the battles with Colossi 1, 3, 4, and 15. I feel like this is the first big encounter song that you hear, obviously, for being Colossi 1. So with this deliberate pacing of the da 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 da, but these big beats that kind of go under it, I feel like almost like mirrors these kind of earth-shattering footsteps that, like, you're in it now. Like, you're trying to take on this first Colossus. Like, good luck. This is how you learn, with such a great piece behind it. Holy cow. And obviously it'll make more appearances, especially early on, but it's a Critical 5 here that I feel like a lot of people point to as like, these are the iconic songs from this game. And there may be others that some people like more or whatever, but I really tried to lean in on the iconic songs for this one. And I love all of these here in the Critical 5, certainly, but this had to be one of them for sure. But we'll get to a couple others where it's like, this had to be here when we're talking about that. And when I haven't played the game, I kind of have to lean a little bit more on what do more people say, like, I know this soundtrack for this song.
So I wouldn't have been able to pull that. I would have been able to pull this off as a Shadow of the Colossus song for sure. Even just hearing it, because it's got the same sort of feeling as other songs that I do know, if that makes sense. This does sort of ring a bell because, like I said, I've watched the game a few times, so I've seen the fight with the first Colossus multiple times. But usually when I'm watching a game, I'm not super paying attention to the soundtrack. But this is ringing a bell, and yes, the footsteps point is really good. Like, really, really good. Because it does have that feeling of, like, passing over the horizon and seeing this giant mountainous being, and the song just being like, all right, get to work.
Let's go.
Good luck.
It's certainly an interesting one, and I think a good way to start the list. But we continue with number 2 on the Critical 5. What happens after you beat that creature? This is the end of the battle. Also known as Tatakai no Owari. This is the death of a Colossus. The black blood sprays from the sigil. And usually, you would think this is a moment to rejoice. This is what Wander has set out to do. It is a momentous occasion to take down such a giant being. It should be a victory fanfare. It is worth celebrating. But no, this song is almost more like a prayer or a requiem, sad choral tones going into an uplifting, light, positive string chord progression. Even so, when Ueda first showed his staff the sequence of what happens when you beat a Colossus and this sad sounding music plays, they thought it was a bug. So they laughed. Obviously, because they're so used to these fanfares of when the player defeats a monster, especially of this size.
So this is a song that I am familiar with because it is one of the strongest bits of Shadow of the Colossus, being that, hey, Wander's kind of the bad guy in this story. Because the Colossi aren't doing anything. They're just minding their own business. And then this dude shows up and is like, all right, I'm going to stab you multiple times. Here we go. They are generally just leaving the world alone. And you are the one that starts the fight for the most part. And so this song has always sort of stuck out to me as like, no, feel bad for what you just did.
Mm-hmm.
You did the bad thing. You were mean. Now it's a sad moment when you beat a Colossus. It's not a, yeah. I mean, when you're playing, it's probably a, yeah. But like the game tries to go out of its way to be like, no celebration.
It's a sobering realization when it comes back down to earth, and definitely influences how the game's narrative develops. But when it's talking about songs that people recognize, songs that are iconic on this soundtrack, I think there's no better example than number 3 on the Critical 5, Revived Power. Japanese title for this being Yomigaeru Chikara. This is played during the battles with Colossi 2, 6, and 9. Especially memorable during the back half of number 2. Because this is your approach on the sigil, on that Colossus specifically. And it's a song that really emphasizes that victory is in your grasp. You're about to prepare to stab that sigil. And if there's one song that you had to identify with this game that you had to hold up as like, this is the song that people should know for Shadow of the Colossus, it is Revived Power here. And that's probably why so many YouTubers use it.
Mm-hmm. Even if you've never played Shadow of the Colossus, if you say you have never heard this song, you're a liar. This song is everywhere. This is the one song that everybody knows. And you might not know it's from Shadow of the Colossus, but there you go. Now you have learned where it is from. This is the one that I recognize the most, and the one that reminds me of the game the most for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely one that is everywhere in gaming YouTuber circles. So it's a good one. And again, like it's early in the game, so most people will recognize it. Especially it's such a victoriously uplifting song while you're doing the difficult thing. But then again, you're brought back down to the sobering realization. So here's another song on the Critical 5, number 4. This is The Farthest Land. I feel like this is another one where people point to it as like, oh man, like this is just the quality of this soundtrack. The Japanese title is Saihate no Chi. This plays on the title screen if you give it about 30 seconds or so, and apparently also plays during a cutscene where Agro is just running free as a horse, just kind of letting off some steam as Wander sleeps and rests. But it just kind of shows like the beauty of the world of nature. I think that's just kind of the best example of it, like the purity of the world. Even though you have these desaturated, muted colors and things just kind of look bleak. Like there's still hope as far as the life that exists there, running through a beast like Agro, the horse there. And it's very heavy with that buzuki. So that stringed instrument that you hear there, that's definitely a big one there. Starts quiet, but kind of builds to this sound in the clip. So influential, apparently, that it is sampled in a song by rapper Lil Peep. Lil Peep's song, Another Song, definitely uses this as a sample, to the point where I looked it up and it's like, oh, yeah. No, that's definitely this song. So I feel like another one where a lot of people are like, yeah, this on the soundtrack for sure is an important one.
Would you believe I've never heard this song? Ever. This is my first time hearing this song, just ever. It's gorgeous, and the buzuki is a very nice sounding instrument. But yeah, I didn't know that Shadow of the Colossus had title screen music. I had no idea.
Interesting. I feel like I've heard it in like, Sporkle or trivia quizzes like about video game soundtracks. I feel like if it's not Revived Power or The Opened Way, it's often this that gets tied to Shadow of the Colossus. Secretly so, because yeah, not a lot of people connect it, but sometimes in trivia, it does. The last song on the Critical 5, it's another kind of hopeful song. This is The Sunlit Earth. This is the very last song that you will hear in the game if you let the credits roll. The title being Hi no Ataru Daichi. This is just a gorgeous song, especially with the little mini arpeggio, the da 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 da, like these little sets of three in the background, and then the flutes going. It's a hopeful song that like life goes on. Life begins anew. Despite the oppressingly overwhelming and depressing tone of the game, things do get better and life moves on.
Not even just the depressingly overwhelming tone of the game, but the ending specifically is not the happiest of endings. Yeah, this is a really gorgeous piece. That I totally agree. It has that like feeling of hope to it, which doesn't make a huge amount of sense if this is indeed a prequel to Eco, but I don't know, maybe I just don't know enough about Eco. Eco I've never watched anybody play, to be fair.
Yeah, I haven't either. I guess I just don't like that guidance quest idea, but it would be interesting to watch sometime. Yeah, I think. Got a couple tracks on the cutting room floor, and these are more Colossi battle tracks because they're also some of the standouts on this soundtrack. The first of which being A Violent Encounter. A Violent Encounter, titled in Japanese Araburu Kaiko. The song plays during the battle with Colossi 2 and 9. So it's one that I remember fondly because like, oh yeah, I battled Colossi 2 and this is the approach song. So you get this melody, which it's like with the horn, and then you got the piano going in the background. It's great to kind of build up that tension, then leading to Revived Power, the one that everybody knows for the stabby stab.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's another strong approach song, one that I have a good connection with. Cause like, yeah, I remember this one. Like I going through the soundtrack, like this one jumps out like, yep, you did that. You played that one.
I think I have vague memories of hearing this one. Cause like listening to it, it sounds very familiar. So I think this is one that like triggers a memory. I don't know. It's good. It's really good.
Definitely a good one. Just like a despair-filled farewell. This one has the title of Zetsubo to no Wakare. This is the battle with Colossi 5, 8, 11, and 14. So it's kind of fleshing out the middle Colossi here, but it's just one that stands out as being extra tense, especially with this horn being da-da, da-da. Like you're feeling it for sure as you're trying to figure out how to stay alive, how to best tackle climbing this beast. From the get-go, it immediately just grabs you, and I really like that a lot about it.
I get Ghibli tones from this one.
It's
the horns specifically, like older Ghibli. Think like, I guess Castle in the Sky, maybe? Maybe not Ghibli. I don't know. What am I thinking of? It's like an old anime aesthetic, kind of.
Sure. I can definitely see that for sure. That's a good call. So what will I never forget about Shadow of the Colossus? Just how bad I am at it. But the game on PS4, and then, carrying over to PlayStation 5, right? It does make it a tempting revisit in the future, especially if you have owned PlayStation Plus for a while and you keep collecting those free games. But it's a great soundtrack. Like I won't deny and say like, oh, it does not deserve to be among the best game soundtracks of all time. Like, no, it's in that higher tier for sure. But like I said earlier, like some people's like, oh, this is the best soundtrack of any medium, of any game. And it's like, kind of disagree, but great tracks, especially for the world not necessarily having like a nationality to it. So the soundtrack is just a little more worldly. It's where you pull the Suzuki. It's like European or Middle East, and then you tie it with an orchestral thing, and they're speaking this made-up language in this world. So I think trying to come up with music that can connect and resonate with everybody is a good call. It's great pieces, but when the world is not fully orchestrated, it does say more about the game's artistry, but I don't know if it speaks to the strength of the soundtrack necessarily.
It sounds like your feelings are very similar to mine on Breath of the Wild. I think Breath of the Wild has a fantastic soundtrack when it plays, but I also think like there is something to be said of sometimes you don't need music, sometimes you just need silence. Mm-hmm. And it does, like both of those games do very well with their use of silence and the sounds of the world around you. And so, I mean, there is something to be said about that, but I definitely get where you're coming from, where it's like, can we really call it one of the best soundtracks of all time when it's rarely ever there? But I mean, some people disagree with that. I mean, that's fine. It comes down to personal taste in the end.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So to transition to our next game, I'd like to talk about a fan cover, a fan remix, whether it's on YouTube or OC Remix. Yes, an OC Remix pull for a game like Shadow of the Colossus had to be done here. Off of the Badass Boss Themes Volume 3 compilation that OC Remix put together is a track from Shadow of the Colossus. It's from Pablo Coma, and it's more of a chill vibe of a song, but this is his take on The Opened Way, called Opening the Way. I think you'll enjoy it, and we'll be right back.
All right, everybody, it's time to get into the real meat of everything because I found way too much. And God, I'm going to try and keep it relatively brief, but this is a big title. Like, big title. I don't think either of us have talked about a game this big since what, like Mario 64?
Maybe, yeah.
Chrono Trigger? Chrono Trigger actually probably would have been the bigger one even. We've talked about some big stuff, but Final Fantasy VII, our next game, is up there in like the top 5 most influential video games to ever be made. It was originally released for the Sony PlayStation in Japan on January 31st, 1997, and would follow in North America on September 7th and in the PAL regions on November 17th. It was developed by Square and published by Square in Japan, but everywhere else it was published by Sony Computer Entertainment. A PC version would be developed by Eidos Interactive and released on June 25th, 1998 in North America and the PAL regions. As the name might suggest, Final Fantasy VII is the 7th game in the Final Fantasy franchise. This is the whopping 3rd Final Fantasy game that we have talked about on this show, with the other 2 being Final Fantasy VI back in episode 23 and Final Fantasy X in episode 46. I think the only franchise that rivals Final Fantasy for how often we have talked about it is Pokemon.
Persona.
Ah, yeah, that's true. Persona. Though we'll run out of those eventually.
But JRPGs, so they're important.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, actually, Final Fantasy VII plays very similarly to Final Fantasy VI, especially with its use of the ATB system, or Active Time Battle. As a refresher, in case you didn't listen to the FF6 episode, unlike other RPGs at the time, Final Fantasy's ATB system means that battles in Final Fantasy were not turn-based for these games. The way ATB works is every character has a little time bar associated with them that fills up over time, and once it fills completely up, then that character is able to perform an action. For this reason, the ATB system sort of makes it so that players have to think on their feet. They don't really have time to like sit and ponder, though I believe 7 does have like a wait option so that once the menus open, things stop happening. But the main idea behind the ATB system is, no, keep going. The action keeps moving all the time. In terms of gameplay, though, there are 2 major differences between 6 and 7. The first being the limit break mechanic. Every character has a gauge that fills whenever they are hit by an enemy attack, and when this gauge is full, they are able to use a super powerful move called a limit break. Each character has 7 limit breaks, 6 of which can be gained by using limits multiple times to up that character's limit level. And one of the limits, their final limit, actually has to be found in the form of an item somewhere in the game, usually near the end game, but sometimes you'll just find them randomly. Pretty sure I found Red 13's. I don't remember where I found it. I just had it in my inventory at some point. For instance, though, Cloud's ultimate limit break, Omni Slash, can only be obtained as a prize in the game's Battle Square area, which is why I didn't get it, because that sucks. While Tifa's ultimate limit break, Final Heaven, can only be obtained by completing a small side quest in a previously visited area. So the other major difference, and in fact probably the biggest difference between the 2 games, is the way that 7 handles skills, which is the materia system. Unlike other games in the series or even in the genre at the time, characters in Final Fantasy VII do not learn a set, tree of skills on their own. Instead, the ability to use various skills and spells and stuff like that are handled by equipping items called materia. Every weapon and piece of armor that you can equip to a character has a set of materia slots on it, and every item is different. Sometimes they are just separate materia slots. Sometimes it's 2 materia slots with a line going between them. And that means that those 2 can be connected materia. And materia even comes in multiple different types. Magic materia is green and provides the wearer with the ability to use spells like Fire, Bolt, or Cure. Command materia is yellow and allows the wearer to perform actions such as Steal or Sense, or even learn certain enemy abilities if they're hit by them and survive. Support materia is blue, and when placed in a slot connected to another materia slot, it will enhance or add to the other materia's effect. So, for instance, the all materia will basically allow you to, if you attach all to, say, Bolt, then when you use Bolt, you'll actually hit every enemy on the field instead of just one enemy. Or the elemental materia, if you put it on a weapon, it will give your weapon the elemental attribute that it is attached to. So let's say you put it on your sword, and you attach elemental to a fire materia, then every time you attack, now you have a fire damage blade. And if you put it on armor, let's say you connect it to poison, now you have increased defense against poison attacks. Independent materia is purple and applies a passive trait to the character it is equipped to, such as upping a stat or causing them to defend other party members by taking hits for them. It can also do stuff like turning off enemy encounters or doubling their EXP and stuff like that. And summon materia are exactly what they sound like. It's how you do summons in Final Fantasy VII. You can summon a powerful being to perform a large-scale attack, basically working like the rest of the series. And this allows the player to have a huge amount of control over their party makeup, as any character can be the healer, any character can be the damage doer, any character can be the defense person, etc., though individual stats still make certain characters a lot more suited to certain jobs than others. For instance, Aerith makes a very good healer because her magic stat is higher than, say, Tifa's. For some, this system is incredible, and they love it. And for others, it's a bit more of a sore spot in the game's design, because constantly exchanging materia between characters becomes a real pain in the butt the farther you go, and the more party members you have. But by far, the biggest difference between Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII is that Final Fantasy VII is the first game in the series to be presented in 3D polygonal graphics. And it's also the first game in the series to not be featured on a Nintendo platform, which was a huge deal at the time, and we'll get into exactly why that was the case here in a bit. The story of Final Fantasy VII takes place in a corporate dystopia where most of the world is governed and controlled by the Shinra Electric Power Company. Shinra is the main supplier of electricity throughout the world, taking advantage of an energy source from within the Earth called Mako. No, it is not pronounced Mako. We learned that like 2 weeks ago, despite the whole world pronouncing it Mako for 23 years. And they use the resulting wealth to form their own private military, their own news organizations, their own space program, and so on and so forth. So they control the world. They are the world government. The player is put in control of Cloud Strife, a former member of Shinra's Special Forces branch, Soldier, that is, the word soldier in all caps, as he takes part in an operation being done by the Environmental Advocacy Group, read, they're eco-terrorists. You play as eco-terrorists in this game for like the first few hours. The organization Avalanche, as they work to bomb one of the Mako reactors, providing energy to Shinra's major metropolis, Midgar. As Cloud continues to work with Avalanche's leader Barrett at the behest of his childhood friend and best girl, Tifa, he finds himself in Shinra's crosshairs, eventually leading him to a young girl named Aerith, who Shinra also seems to have a keen interest in. The battle against Shinra is thrown into even more chaos when the legendary hero of Soldier, Sephiroth, thought to have been killed 5 years prior, appears and sets in motion a series of events that will threaten the very planet itself. And this is where I will ask, Peter, what are your experiences with Final Fantasy VII?
It is a game that I've started a couple times and don't get very far in and stop playing. I understand that many people have a deep reverence and nostalgia for this game, and it did so much for JRPGs, not only as a genre, but also their acceptance here in the United States. I understand and appreciate that. However, I feel like it's a game that has not aged as well as it could have, much like how we've talked about aspects of Mario 64, right? But this is a game that is being remade, and that's why we're talking about it today. And so when I play the demo for the remake, as you reference how we learned how Mako is pronounced, it is a game I'm very excited for. Have pre-ordered this for a long time, was so excited to see the remake announcement when it happened in June E3 2015. That was a big deal, but yeah, obviously, like, it's such an influential game, and you know the characters, you learn the characters, what they're all about, the different spoilers associated with this game. Like, there isn't much to, be kept in the dark about with this game if you're a game enthusiast. It comes with the territory, especially when, it's such an important game, and characters, and big moments, and musical cues, and all sorts of things. So I don't feel like I have to play the original to be excited for the remake or appreciate what it did for the industry or know the big moments.
I played it for the first time last year for Smasherpieces because it's Cloud's game. There was no other option. And I enjoyed my time with it because I played it on Switch. And Switch puts in cheats, which means the parts that didn't age super great made better because I can just get them done with.
I feel like that does make a big difference. I mean, I've tried both times on PlayStation Vita.
Because I agree with you. I don't think this game aged as well as some people like to think it did. I think it's still good, but it's no Chrono Trigger. I think it is a very good game. I enjoy the cast. I enjoy the story. But yeah, it is definitely a game that released in 1997 at the advent of 3D video games.
Real quick though, don't you love how people are like, I don't like how there are politics in games today. What about the times when there weren't politics in games, like Final Fantasy VII?
I just described the plot as taking place in a corporate dystopia, and there are people that say that FF7 is not political at all. There are people that will die on that hill, and we call those people stupid. This is one of the most overtly political games to come out that year. It has themes of protect the environment, and, hey, isn't it kind of screwed up that this corporation owns the world?
Fight the power. And then the next year, 1998, Metal Gear Solid. Politics used to not be in games.
Man, why can't they just stop making political games like they did in the 90s? Oh, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, if you're going to play Final Fantasy VII, the Switch version is the way to go because of the cheats. They have a double speed cheat that makes everything move at double speed. They have the ability to turn off random encounters. That one's huge. And if you really get stuck, they have the ability to, every second, it refills your health and also fills up your limit gauge. And unless an enemy can one-shot you, you are unkillable. And that is for if you really, really get stuck.
Aren't there also level 99 cheats?
So we were told. We never found them.
Interesting.
So I don't know. I never figured out how to do that. I kind of didn't want to because I didn't want to go that far. But those three alone made that a much faster and much more enjoyable experience for somebody like me that did not grow up with Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation 1. Speaking of, let's get into the development of this game because it is absolutely fascinating, and I found too much information about it. So, first of all, the initial plans for Final Fantasy VII actually began to materialize at Square in 1994, shortly after the completed development of Final Fantasy VI, as another 2D installment for the Super Nintendo. So, Originally, this was supposed to be just another 2D Final Fantasy. But what stopped it, you ask? Well, the Final Fantasy team put talk about 7 on hold specifically so they could go help develop Chrono Trigger. So in a way, Final Fantasy VII's existence is directly attributable to Chrono Trigger in certain ways. After Chrono Trigger's completion in 1995, the team continued discussions about the possible concepts for FF7, especially whether they would stick to 2D, which at the time would be a safe and affordable option, or do we do the more risky maneuver and try and dip our toes into the newly emerging world of 3D video games? And eventually, they decided that riskier option would potentially be more rewarding and decided that Final Fantasy VII was going to be their first crack at a 3D RPG. But this led to another hard question. What platform were they going to develop Final Fantasy VII for? For the most part, their decision was stuck between the cartridge-based Nintendo 64 or the CD-based Sony PlayStation, though I found it funny they did mention that at some point they were also considering the Sega Saturn, or even just straight up making it a Windows PC exclusive.
Oh, what a different world it would have been at that time. And then even, Sony PlayStation, like there's the whole thing of Nintendo and Philips and going on back on a deal with Sony and the whole politics of that.
Oh, we are about to learn why that was the biggest whiff in video game history specifically.
Woo!
So, while trying to make this decision, Square produced a tech demo using the software Soft Image 3D and began to run tests on the Nintendo 64, specifically using the upcoming 64DD add-on, which we have mentioned multiple times, usually to talk about how a game that was meant for it was canceled or reworked. Not only did this test fail due to the low frame rate as a result of the 2,000 polygons used to render the character Behemoth, but estimates showed that using the data compression methods of the time, they would require 30 64DD discs in order to run the game in its entirety.
Wow. Oof.
So with that being said, this combined with the fact that cartridges were climbing in price and CDs just generally had more storage space, Square decided not only to shift Final Fantasy VII development onto the PlayStation, but every future project of the company onto the PlayStation. So they basically dropped anything Nintendo console, because I believe they were still coming out with like Game Boy games and stuff. They basically just dropped it like a hot potato. So yeah, imagine the world where the Nintendo PlayStation happened and this split didn't happen. Like one specific moment in time that led to the biggest possible branch in the industry ever. Fascinating.
They created a monster of a competitor. Plain and simple.
Oh yeah. So, in terms of actual development of the game, due to the fact that designing characters and art in 3D was a vastly different process from designing them in 2D, art director Yusuke Naora was given a team whose entire job was visual design. This team's responsibilities included illustration, 3D modeling, texturing, environmental design, visual effects, and animation. And from what I can tell, this was a first for any game being developed by Square. They didn't used to have this. It was just like some people did visual design, but they also dabbled in other stuff. The logo design of Final Fantasy VII was done by Yoshitaka Amano, and it's based on Meteor, which is the predominant threat during much of the late game. But the part I found really interesting is that the green coloring on the logo is meant to represent the lighting in Midgar, as well as the color of the life stream, while the blue is meant to reflect the ecological themes of the story. Always interesting to see, like, the exact reason why logos look the way they do or the color schemes they use. You don't get that information very often. It's fascinating when you do.
Yeah, especially when Amano is such a classic artist in the world of video games. I mean, the classic character art that you see for Final Fantasy VI and other games, like, that's pure Amano.
FF7 was also the major debut of character designer Tetsuya Nomura, who we have talked about on the show a few times for things like Final Fantasy, The World Ends With You, and Kingdom Hearts, which is what he's known for today. He had impressed producer Hironobu Sakaguchi during earlier projects because, unlike most of his colleagues who presented typed proposals, Nomura's proposals were often handwritten and illustrated. So Sakaguchi was like, all right, I like this kid's gumption, and threw him in to be one of the lead character designers on Final Fantasy VII.
And the zippers and belts were
began. In terms of designing Cloud and Sephiroth, Nomura says that his main inspiration was the rivalry between the prominent samurai figures in Japanese history, Miyamoto Musashi and Sasaki Kojiro, with Cloud being Musashi and Sephiroth being Kojiro, respectively. From what I could tell, Sephiroth's designs seemingly stayed relatively similar for most of development, but Cloud was apparently supposed to have slicked back black hair to contrast with Sephiroth's long silver hair. And eventually, Nomura became worried that such a masculine design would prove unpopular with fans, and so moved Cloud's design to the spiky yellow hair that we know today, and that black slicked back hair went to the character Zack. In terms of writing the game, the initial plot concept was actually written by Sakaguchi in '94, and this concept was changed heavily before reaching the final release, but I have got to read the quote from the Wikipedia article because I kind of want to play this game. Quote, in this draft for the planned SNES version, the game's setting was envisioned as New York City in 1999. Similar to the final story, the main characters were part of an organization trying to destroy Mako reactors, but they were pursued by a hot-blooded detective named Joe. The main characters would eventually blow up the city.
Why do I imagine Joe Pesci playing this role?
Oh my god, I didn't even think about that. That's perfect. Make this game.
Hey, you spiky-headed blonde kid, stop!
Though this game was kind of made because the Wikipedia article mentions right after that the idea of putting an RPG in New York would later be repurposed for Parasite Eve in 1998. And this is also the concept that is credited with causing their decision to move away from the series' traditionally fantasy-based roots into a more sci-fi direction. And also, this concept is where the concept of the life stream being a part of the plot came from as well. So eventually, writing duties moved to Yoshinori Kitase because Sakaguchi decided to take a back seat to the development of this game. Instead of being the writer and director, he was the producer of Final Fantasy VII, and that's all. So the writing duties moved to Yoshinori Kitase, with assistance provided by Nomura. Some fun, non-spoilery, except for that one spoiler that, look, we all know it. It's part of the cultural zeitgeist at this point. We can't cover it. But I won't get into huge spoilers because, the game is being remade and some people are going to be experiencing it for the first time, I guess. So, whatever.
Even though I guess Square put out a trailer recently as of recording.
I'm told the trailer that came out today at day of recording is super spoilery. I have not watched it. I will not watch it. But yeah, good job, Square. After telling Australia to please don't spoil the game because they got it early because of the pandemic.
Watch the streaming limitations, though.
So, while Final Fantasy VI had been successful with its ensemble cast, there are 15 characters in Final Fantasy VI, and none of them are the main character. The decision was made early on to focus more on a central protagonist for this game, and Nomura came up with the idea to have most of the game be about pursuing the main villain throughout the world, because apparently that was a thing that was just not done in RPGs at the time. Because the whole game is basically just following a breadcrumb trail that Sephiroth is leaving behind him as he goes. So, Nomura, wanting the theme to be life and wanting to, quote, depict living and dying, proposed killing off the heroine, who in this case was Aerith. This idea was approved, but as Aerith was at the time the only heroine in the game, they decided they would need to make a second heroine to make the concept work. That is why Tifa exists. Tifa exists specifically because they decided to kill Aerith. Which is funny because she's the better character. One idea that they had, and it does not go into detail about this, and I want to know every bit of it, was for the entire cast to die right before the final battle. But Nomura vetoed this idea as he was afraid it would lessen the impact of Aerith's death.
That's okay. Nomura would just accept it for another Square Enix game.
Yeah. Speaking of Aerith, by the way, Aerith was originally planned to be Sephiroth's sister, which is why her hair looks like that.
Huh.
That is specifically why her hair is designed the way it is. She was meant to be his sister. And then the idea was moved to Sephiroth being a previous love interest for Aerith.
Jeez.
And then that idea was also scrapped, and that spot was given to the character Zack. Also, lastly, the characters of Vincent and Yuffie were originally planned to be part of the main narrative, but due to time constraints, ended up as optional party members and almost being cut entirely. So, Vincent got his own game. Imagine the different world that would have been. And Yuffie is like a super popular character. She's in Kingdom Hearts. Like, imagine how weirdly different that world would have been. So there's a lot of information on the visuals of Final Fantasy VII because they were super revolutionary for the time. Like, even among other 3D games at the time, like Final Fantasy VII, you look at it now and you can't see that because Popeye graphics. But at the time, like, that was mind-blowingly good looking for a 3D game, and the cutscenes were very well animated and stuff like that. I'm going to touch on some quick trivia bits about the visuals, because there were some that I just couldn't leave off because they're so good. While trying to figure out if the game would use sprites or polygonal models, because I guess sprites were still on the table even after they decided to go 3D, the final deciding factor to commit to models was the team playing the 1992 DOS game Alone in the Dark and seeing its use of 3D modeled characters. So Alone in the Dark, a DOS game, directly responsible for Final Fantasy VII looking the way it does. The technology to create Final Fantasy VII's visuals, both the workstations and the software to go with them, cost Square an estimated $21 million. And that's just the workstations and software. One major issue the team ran into was the gap between the memory on the PS1 dev kits and the PS1 itself. I don't get the technical details of this, but I'll try and explain it in a way that I guess sort of made sense to me. While the dev kits had 400 megabytes of memory, the actual console only had 2 megabytes of memory with 500 megabytes for texture memory.
Wow.
So they had to figure out how to compress the visuals without losing the effects they had worked on. And they were mainly successful due to the fact that Sony reluctantly gave them direct access to the hardware specifications, which I guess is not something Sony did generally.
Well, it was probably a good thing that they did.
And as it is on a disk-based system, FF7 was able to take advantage of the ability to use full motion video, or FMV. These cutscenes were worked on by people both in Japan and in America, and included artists and staff who had previously worked on films like Star Wars, Jurassic Park, and Terminator 2. In total, there are 40 minutes of FMV cutscenes in Final Fantasy VII, something only made possible by the game's shift to the PlayStation. In terms of localization, Final Fantasy VII is infamous for having a bit of a not great localization. Most people are aware of things like attack while its tail is up, which, if you're not aware of that, the very first boss you fight in the game has a moment where it brings its tail up, and if you attack it while it's like that, it will counterattack with a super strong laser attack. The localization has 2 text boxes. The first says, attack while its tail is up. And the second says, and you will get counterattacked. But most people miss that second one because they're jamming A. So they see it and think, oh, I'm supposed to attack when its tail is up. The other being the infamous debate between whether or not it's Aerith, the right one, or Eris, the wrong one. This was apparently a direct product of the horrible pipeline and communication between the two countries, where Aerith is her actual name. It is supposed to be a mixture of air and earth, and her name is also supposed to be Earth. But Eris is what it ended up on, because th is not a sound that exists in Japanese. So the things I learned about the localization. The FF7 localization was done in 6 months by a team of about 50 people, except only one person on that 50-person team was a translator.
Guys.
And his name was Michael Basket, and he translated the entire game by himself using a script he was given that was out of order.
Oh, guys.
So that's one of the main reasons why that was a train wreck. There's a few other reasons, such as, and I don't get the technical bits of this, but as it was explained to me in the article I read, due to the way the text was programmed into the game, word processors still read the text as being in Japanese, even while being input as English. This meant that the team could not make use of things like spell check, and they could only catch mistakes manually. In terms of other localization blunders, when Sony mentioned that they were considering cutting a scene at the Honeybee Inn in Midgar, which is a love hotel that you go into during one section of the game, fans began writing protest letters and petitions before Square stepped in and assured them that this would not happen because Sony was not handling the localization of the game.
Kind of sounds like what people were worried about for the remake, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I do want to give a shout out, though. I haven't watched this series, but our friend Matt has. And he wanted to make sure I gave a shout out to it. There is an entire video series on Kotaku that is just a deep dive into the awkward localization of Final Fantasy VII called Let's Mosey. I've not had a chance to watch it, like I said, but Matt gave me a quote to describe its general tone that I'm just going to read out real quick, which is, the very first line of the game is, in Japanese, Ikuzo shiniri, ore ni Suzuki. This was translated to, come on, newcomer, follow me. Let's break down the Japanese. Barrett calls Cloud Shin-iri. Shin equals new, iri equals recruit. The localization wisely does not call him rookie, because Shin-iri does not simply imply that he is inexperienced. It actually kind of implies the opposite. He was hired as a recruit for his expertise. First day on the job is a pretty common character trope, and that's what Cloud is going through right now, but newcomer is kind of a weird thing to call him. It's not very natural English. As a point of comparison, in the remake, this was translated as, get down here, merc, which more effectively communicates that Cloud is an experienced soldier, but he's not part of the group. Now extrapolate this exact thought process to every line in Disc 1 of Final Fantasy VII, and you've got Let's Mosey.
Wow.
So it sounds like a fascinating series. I've been meaning to watch it for a while. I just haven't had a chance. So definitely go check that out if you want to learn more about the localization of FF7. While the game was a success, its localization, especially in other languages outside of English, is considered really bad, pretty poor. The game's success in the West was apparently the main cause of Square figuring out better methods of localizing their games well afterwards. And in the end, FF7's development budget made it one of the most expensive video game projects of its era, estimated at $40 million, which in today's money would be about $64,500,000. And it was developed by a team of about 100 to 150 people in just over a year. So within 3 days of being out in Japan, FF7 sold over 2 million copies. It was so popular that multiple vendors in North America decided to break street date in order to get it to the clamoring fans earlier so they could get that money earlier. In less than 3 weeks of being released in America, it had sold over 500,000 copies, hitting 1 million copies by December of that year. Final Fantasy VII is considered one of, if not the most influential RPG ever made, making Final Fantasy a household name in America where it was just sort of a niche thing at that point. We had only gotten 3 of them before this. Remember, they had to rename FF6 to FF3 when we got it, which must have been really confusing. When this one came out, it was like, it's 7. It's Final Fantasy VII. This game's success is why we got the other ones in the first place. It became a phenomenon in gaming culture and is still in the running for being one of the best games ever made in many fans' eyes. I don't agree with them, but to each their own. It can currently be purchased and played on pretty much every modern platform, including Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and PC.
And fortunately, you don't have to worry about changing 3 discs.
Yeah, you don't have to worry at all. I'm playing Twin Snakes right now, and even switching to the second disc was a pain in the butt. The success of Final Fantasy VII is visible even outside of its own game, with Cloud, Sephiroth, Yuffie, Aerith, Cid, and Tifa all appearing in the Kingdom Hearts series. A sequel film titled Final Fantasy VII Advent Children was released in 2005. Multiple spin-off games have been released, including the mobile game Before Crisis, the PS2 action game Dirge of Cerberus, and the PSP game Crisis Core. I haven't heard many things about Before Crisis. I know a lot of people really like Crisis Core and wanted to get a re-release. I've heard nothing but the fact that Dirge of Cerberus is abject garbage. And multiple fighting games have featured FF7 characters, from the Final Fantasy spin-off Arena Fighter series Dissidia, featuring Cloud, Sephiroth, I believe Tifa as well, to the PS1 fighting game Ehrgeiz, which features Cloud and Sephiroth. And of course, most importantly, Cloud was added to Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS as DLC in 2015, alongside a stage based on Midgar, returning in Ultimate, which was one of those moments where it was like, oh, so there are no rules anymore. That was a hell of an announcement.
Sure was. And then you follow up with Snake and boom, you got it.
Yeah. At E3 2005, a recreation of the opening of FF7 using the PS3's higher graphical capabilities was shown, causing fans to begin speculating that a full remake of the game was in development. Square shot down this rumor, but fan demand only grew as years went by. Eventually, Square caved, and a full remake was announced at E3 2015 for the PlayStation 4, and Part 1 of that remake releases this week on Friday.
Finally! I always remember one of our friends always speculating that, like, whenever they announce the Final Fantasy VII remake, that's when you know Square is giving up, throwing in the towel.
That and Kingdom Hearts 3 were their in case of emergency break glass projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's that, but also I feel it is important to stress that Square is going to get a bunch of flack coming up here because not everyone who follows game news is realizing or knows that this is only going to be part 1 of likely 3.
And they took the title they took part 1 off of the title, which is weird.
Oh, it's going to be a really bad mistake, I think. A lot of people who don't follow that kind of information are going to be like, it only stops when they're leaving Midgard? Like, they're going to be confused.
Yeah. Bad, weird decision for sure. But, I mean, I don't run. That game's going to make $1 million anyways. Who cares?
Yeah.
So, we're going to talk about the composer for this one being Mitsuto Suzuki, who you might be thinking, that's not who did the music for Final Fantasy VII. That was Nobuo Uematsu. You are correct. But we've already talked about Nobuo Uematsu, so Mitsuto Suzuki is actually the one who is handling some of the music in Remake. So we figured that this was a good chance to go ahead and talk about him. Sort of, I guess, because I didn't find like anything. He was born in April of 1973 in Kyoto, Japan, and apparently he started his career by producing electronic solo albums and eventually ended up working at Square Enix as an arranger and sound programmer before moving on to being a composer. That's all I got. That's it. Even his discography was kind of hard to find because a bunch of sites had like clashing information. Some had some games, and then another site would not have that game, but have a game that the other site didn't have. And so, from what I can tell, VGMD claims that he was an arranger on Zone of the Enders, which was a Konami game, which is kind of weird. But I can't find any other source saying this. IMDb claims that he was a synthesizer operator on Final Fantasy Fables Chocobo's Dungeon, and that he did an arrangement of the song Pre-Parade in the first episode of the anime Toradora, which is one of my favorite anime of all time. The ones that I can say for sure he worked on was he was an arranger on Final Fantasy XIII and Dissidia 012 Final Fantasy, as well as a composer on The Third Birthday, Final Fantasy XIII 2, Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy XIII, and Mobius, Final Fantasy. In terms of historical development research for Final Fantasy VII, again, obviously the actual soundtrack was done by none other than Nobuo Uematsu himself, the man, the myth, the legend. Originally, Uematsu had planned to make use of vocal performances in more than just that song, but found that this increased the game's load times to be so bad that it wasn't worth it. Uematsu's approach to composing for this game was to, quote, treat it like a film soundtrack and compose music that reflected the mood of the scenes, rather than trying to make strong melodies to define the game, as he felt that approach would come across too strong when placed alongside the game's new 3D visuals. So he was not so much scoring for the game as he was for the scenes that were happening in the game, is what I took from that. And he apparently legitimately started at the very beginning for this project, because the first thing he was shown was the opening cinematic and asked to make music for that. And that was the first thing that he composed for the entire project. And he says he knew it was going to be a very good project when that track was immediately well received by the team.
Boy, was it. It's a great track. Great track.
Mm-hmm. All right. I've talked a lot about Final Fantasy VII. It is finally time to get into the critical tracks and hear what this game sounds like. Starting with track number 1, Let the Battles Begin. This is a song you hear a lot because it is the main battle theme of the game. And honestly, it's kind of among my favorite random encounter songs in games. Even now, it was kind of up there before I played the game even. It just has this really great energy to it. Like it's really like the it just feels really cool, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
But at the same time, like, you can tell it's held back by the instrument set on PlayStation.
Oh, very much so.
It is, streaming MIDI technology, and MIDIs were only so good at the time.
Especially on the PlayStation, especially on the early PlayStation. But speaking of being held back by the MIDIs, this is actually one of the few songs that we've heard the remake version of, and hey, it rules. So good.
Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to be up there for Soundtrack of the Year.
It's going to have such a good soundtrack. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm almost more excited for the soundtrack than I am for the game itself. But yeah, Let the Battles Begin. It's an iconic track for sure. Boy, I wish it got remixed in Smash. Or anything got remixed in Smash. Always going to be one of the biggest crimes ever. Track number 2 is going to come out in left field, and you can fight me on this. I don't care. It's Tifa's theme. I hear you now. What? Tifa's theme? Not Aerith's theme? Yeah, it's the better character theme. Fight me. You don't want to fight me. Tifa's on my side, and she can bend a robot over her knee with her bare hands. Tifa is not only the better girl, dropping some hot takes today, she also has the more interesting theme. I just think it really, really fits her character, and it's really soothing to listen to. Like, it's a really nice song that you can just sort of let wash over you. Don't get me wrong. I'm throwing a lot of shade here. Aerith's theme is fine. It's a good song. But I like Tifa's theme better overall.
Yeah, and it's a good track, but this is definitely you injecting a personal taste into this one, where it's
100%.
Where it's just not as iconic.
I would agree, but that's why I get to make the list. I don't know. I just need to, you got to drum up that controversy so you get those clicks, 2 hours into the episode. Our next track number 3, is the main theme of Final Fantasy VII. Would you believe that it takes 3 to 5 hours to hear this song for the first time? This is the music that plays when you are out on the overworld map. And it just has this feeling of like, hey, dude, this world is wide open to you. Go out there, do some things, get some stuff, fight some stuff. It's great. This piece is gorgeous. It's also super long.
I feel like the piece is great. It's iconic. It's had to be here, but why not just call it main theme?
I agree.
Do we have to call it main theme of Final Fantasy VII? Is that necessary?
Well, it's also just weird to call it the main theme of Final Fantasy VII when it's like the 15th track on the soundtrack.
I mean, it was one thing to call the main overworld theme of Final Fantasy VI Terra, but I don't know. Yeah, this is strange. But I mean, God, what a piece. What a piece.
Yeah, and this is another one we've actually heard at least a sample of what it sounds like in Remake, which is really weird, by the way. Because in the original game, you hear this for the first time when you leave Midgar.
I bet you it's going to be the last song that you hear before credits roll.
Potentially. That would be interesting. But yeah, we've heard a sample of what it sounds like in Remake. And again, it's gorgeous. Just absolutely fantastic. And God, I'm excited for that game. I'm wondering if it is going to be that. If it's going to be the final song you hear. Or if there is going to be some weird, map for Midgar, because we actually have not seen what it looks like to walk around Midgar yet. We don't know. It could be a world map. It could just be like a big sprawling city. We have no idea. I'm very interested to see how that ends up looking. But let's get a move on to track number 4, Golden Saucer. this is my personal favorite song in the game. It is the theme for the Gold Saucer, which is basically a big theme park, casino, hotel, place, and entertainment area. The Gold Saucer is very well known. It's one of the iconic locations from Final Fantasy VII. Like, it's right below Midgar, I think, because it has shown up in other Final Fantasy games. It's in 14. The casino where you can go play games and stuff with friends is the Gold Saucer. In Final Fantasy VII, it's mostly well known because you can go on a date there near the end of Disc 1. And depending on the responses to various things throughout the game up to that point, you can go on a date with Aerith, Tifa, Yuffie, or if you screw up with all three of them, Barret.
That's an interesting thing about that game, I'm sure, because, yeah, even very early on from the bit I play, you can tell how responses, especially with dropped flowers and things like that, can possibly influence that. I hear this song and I think of Guardian Millennial Fair from Chrono Trigger a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it has the same sort of tone about it. It's just this fun, bouncy energy that always has me coming back to listen to it. This is my favorite song to play in Theatrhythm, which is actually the first time I ever heard it. As you can imagine, at a rhythm game, this song is a blast to play. And yeah, the Golden Saucer, to play the Gold Saucer sucks. Both sections that take place at the Gold Saucer, well, not the date. The date's fun. But like the first time you go to the Gold Saucer is a terrible, terrible part of the game because it involves chocobo racing. Which if you ever wanted to play a game and it not be good, play chocobo racing. But yeah, Gold Saucer is aesthetically fun and its song is fantastic. And then comes track number 5. And there's literally no other track it could be. This is the only one. This is the one from the game. It's One Winged Angel. This is the theme for the final boss of Final Fantasy VII, the final showdown between Safer Sephiroth, which is another example of a really bad localization. I don't remember what it's actually supposed to be, but it's sure not supposed to be Safer Sephiroth.
Listen to your Smasher Pieces episode on Final Fantasy VII to find out.
Yeah, we did mention that. Matt went really deep for that episode. It was a lot of fun. This song is often called Uematsu's most recognizable contribution to the music of Final Fantasy, and he agrees with this distinction, but I think it goes a little further than that. I think this is one of his most recognizable contributions to video game music as a whole. I think this is the most iconic song to come out of the series, and is just this massive juggernaut of music. Like, Dancing Mad is the only final boss song that I think stands up to it even slightly. And in terms of being in the cultural zeitgeist, even Dancing Mad can't compete.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. It's two very comparable tracks. Dancing Mad, you have a whole almost operatic opus that you're stringing together, but it is on a limited technology base. Mm-hmm. When you start to add recordings of vocalists for one song, it's like taking video game music up another level to be taken more seriously than the beeps and the bloops that we talk about, right? So it is an important one for sure.
He cites his main inspiration for the song as The Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky. His goal was apparently to make a track that fused classical music with late 60s rock and roll to, quote, make an orchestral track with a destructive impact. And nailed it. He nailed it. He apparently spent 2 weeks composing short, unconnected musical phrases and then arranged them together to create the song we know today, which was a process that he had never previously used.
which also makes sense because the choral and the orchestral songs do kind of sound like a couple different pieces. They work ultimately when fused together, but there is a distinct difference between the rhythmic chanting and the rest of the normal kind of sounding piece for what you'd expect Final Fantasy VII to sound like.
I love this song, but a funny little tidbit about it is my Google Dot can't find it, ever. If I tell it to play One Winged Angel, it realizes, oh, he wants a Final Fantasy song, but then says a title that is absolutely nothing like what I said. It used to be Chaos Shrine. One of them will be like, playing Chaos Shrine by Nobuo Uematsu. And I'll be like, that's not what I said. And then it'll play Battle at the Big Bridge from Final Fantasy V, which is also not the song that it said. And this one, I don't remember what the one in my room says, but neither of them can play One Winged Angel, and I don't understand why. I don't, it's the only song that it does that with. So, I don't know. It's weird. So, for tracks on the cutting room floor, you have 2. Hit me with them.
It's all right, fam. I got you. We're not leaving it off the cutting room floor at all. Gotta talk Aerith's theme. See, it was going to be here. I like to bring a little bit of the iconography.
And I'll admit, right out of the gate. Yes, this is the more iconic song. Yes, it should be up there, but I like Tifa better, and I'm coloring my own opinions.
Notably plays during one of the most iconic moments in all of video games. Just, just a little track there. just kind of important.
Small track, nobody remembers it.
But it does have a difference between like the softer tones of the melody, and then you have the big orchestral swell like we have here in the clip. So it's an important melody overall, even when it's like not what's the just plucked strings almost in a way, the simplicity of it, or the big swelling strings. So an important theme. It's okay. It's here in some capacity.
Yeah.
The other is one of my personal favorites from the soundtrack. This is Genova. Sometimes I've seen it as J, but it's commonly spaced out with hyphens between every letter of capital Genova. I'm assuming plays when you're battling Genova.
It plays multiple times with fights that are related to Genova. It's weird to explain without like getting into A, spoilers, and B, stuff that would take way too long to explain. But yes, for the most part, I've always gotten the idea that the intro to this song is like the stars falling out of the sky.
Yeah.
It's a really good song. I agree. It was definitely on the list because like this is another one of those soundtracks where it's just like, I mean, something's got to get cut. Something's got to go off.
So many great tracks.
Genova was one of them, unfortunately.
Yeah. So it's a favorite of mine. If I had to pick between the two, I like this compared to One Winged Angel. Again, One Winged Angel, great for what it did for video game music, but if I had to listen to one or the other, I'm picking Genova over One Winged Angel. Maybe that makes me weird. I don't know.
I'd pick One Winged Angel any day of the week. I love that song.
Yeah. So that's just my oddity, I suppose. I always recognize this one or remember it with a mashup that someone did with a duel from the subbed version of Yu-Gi-Oh! The anime, where it's Yugi versus Kaiba, and the enemy controller card has been played, and it's like an old like video, like enemy controller Genova, and they're taking clips of Kaiba talking with Monster Card, and he's laughing, reverse card will open, and the enemy controller is doing a whole bunch of different button clicks, all in time with Genova. It's such a masterful, brilliant edit. It's one of my favorite videos on YouTube for quite a while.
Interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that video. For me, my first track on the cutting room floor is Bombing Mission. This is the music from the very beginning of the game, the first scene during the mission to bomb the first reactor. This section of the game was the demo that was apparently given out on demo discs. So many people became exceedingly familiar with this song. And we've also gotten to hear how this song sounds in Remake, and surprising nobody, hey, it's great.
Wow, wow, wow. So much wow.
Like, I love this song, and I think the version in Remake just kills it. Oh, it's my favorite song that I've heard in Remake so far.
Honestly, for as much as it plays during that demo, like, it really did it justice. It's fantastic.
And my second track on the cutting room floor is one that you might not expect, and that's The Great Warrior. This actually plays during my favorite singular scene in the game, when Red 13 learns the truth about his father. You might be thinking, who's Red 13? He's a dog. He can talk. That's Red 13. It's a more somber version of a song called Cosmo Canyon, which barely got left off this list as well. I think it's up there with Genova as like, this was probably almost on the list. But as this is just a different version of that song, and I think it's the more meaningful version of that song, I wanted to give it a shout out. It's very good. There are other songs that I wish I could have thrown on this list, like the aforementioned Cosmo Canyon. You got Fight On. That one hurt to leave off.
Oh gosh, yeah. I'm sure a lot of people are a little salty on that.
Yeah, just a little bit. Just all sorts of stuff. The Turks theme is really good. There are stuff that we have to leave off, but like, that's the nature of the show, man. That's how it goes sometimes. So what will I never forget about Final Fantasy VII? It was the first Final Fantasy game I ever beat. And then the next day I beat the second Final Fantasy game I ever beat, which was 10. It was about half a year of my life playing it for Smash to Pieces. So if you want a real, like, solid rundown of what I thought about that game at each step of the way, it's a 5-part thing that we did for Final Fantasy VII last year, and I think it turned out very well, all 5 of them. And I am insanely excited for Remake. To quote our friend Matt, I am experiencing, quote, 20 years of retroactive nostalgia. Because I would have been excited if I hadn't played the game. Like you mentioned, you're excited and you haven't played Final Fantasy VII.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we're a week out as of recording and several days as of episode release, so.
Mm-hmm. But having played it, my excitement is now through the roof. I am ready.
It should be a great release. You're right. Square's going to make a buttload of money, and then they're going to get a lot of people angry when it's surprise it's not done.
It's also going to be the last big game that comes out in 2020.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see how all that plays out in this continuing Corona time. But for now, with these very influential PlayStation games all considered, that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at Littlebaga. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, also at rhymeswithasia.com, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want. on Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. Not only where you can get original Soundchat, but Joe's other show, Smasterpieces, as we've referenced here. The MP3 podcast version can also be found on podcast storefronts all around the globe. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, where we not only have the MP3 podcast feed, but also a big playlist where if we mention a song on this show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to the playlist. Anything added this week, Joe?
So Final Fantasy VII is on Spotify because Square just dumped all of the Final Fantasy soundtracks on like last year. I kind of hope they do the same for Remake. I wouldn't blame them if they waited a couple of weeks, but I really hope they do the same for Remake. Surprisingly, though, Shadow of the Colossus is not. Sony has in the past been pretty good about having their stuff on Spotify, but no sign of Shadow of the Colossus at all on Spotify. It's a shame.
That is an odd one, especially with the remake, and they seem to put forth an effort with highlighting Kow Otani and all that. Interesting. So, hopefully we get some time to work on some more bonus tracks, especially as we are in this working from home phase here during this special time in the world. Boy, oh boy, it gets weirder and weirder, Joe, I'll tell you.
Boy, does it. So my life has been largely unchanged, and that's somehow just as weird.
Yeah, I bet. I had to go out a couple times for work this week, and I'm like, nope, I don't like this. I don't want to expose myself to the public. No, thank you. Anyway, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Ryan Ike.
I will be talking about Michael McCann. Couple interesting games to talk about there. So, Joe, let's play us out.
I've actually had this one in mind for a while. I don't remember when I stumbled on it, but when I decided I was doing Final Fantasy VII, this was the choice that I decided to go with because I love this. It is an organ solo rendition of One Winged Angel done by YouTuber Grassini Project. It's so good. It's so cool. So please enjoy that.
It's an actual solo organ. Pretty neat stuff, absolutely. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.